Welcome back to History's Hidden Corners. This is a story that sounded like a joke until you realize it isn't. A wave tore through the streets of London. Not water, not fire, but beer. Thousands of gallons of it, rushing, crashing, destroying everything in its path. And when it was over, people had died. This happened on October 17th, 1814, to a crowded neighborhood in London, in a disaster no one saw coming. In the early 1800s, London had a taste for something bold, a heavy London ale, dark, rich, and strong. It was the drink of the working class, filling taverns, fueling long days, and woven into the rhythm of daily life. And it wasn't brewed in small batches. It was produced on a scale that feels almost impossible now. The brewery had towering wooden vats that rose above the workers, massive, silent structures that dominated the space. Some stood as tall as four-story buildings. Inside them, a deep, malty brew resting and fermenting, each vat holding hundreds of thousands of gallons at a time. Barrel after barrel, batch after batch, the brewery supplied a city that couldn't seem to get enough. But with that scale came risk. And on that day in October 1814, something inside those towering vats gave way. To keep them secure, metal rings were wrapped tightly around the vats. They held the wood together, firm against the curves of the vat, keeping the immense pressure inside from forcing its way out. Day after day, they bore the weight, the strain, the slow, constant push within. Most of the time, it held up, but occasionally one would slip. A single hoop falling loose from a vat of that size wasn't unheard of. Workers noticed, they reported it, and more often than not, nothing happened. Because these vats were so large, so heavily reinforced, that one hoop didn't seem like, that one hoop didn't seem like a threat. It was just part of the work until the day it wasn't. The warning was noted, but then ignored. Hours later, the vat burst. The pressure inside had been building for months, fermenting, expanding, a living process, slow, unseen, but relentless. Deep within the vats, the heavy London ale churned and transformed, releasing gases that pressed outward against the wood, against the iron, against anything holding it into place. Day by day, the strain increased, not suddenly, but steadily, quietly. The vats didn't creak loud enough to warn. The pressure didn't announce itself. It simply grew, waiting for something to give. The force was so violent it triggered a chain reaction. Other vats ruptured with it. In seconds, a wave estimated at 15 feet high surged into the streets. Behind the brewery sat St. Gil's, a poor, crowded district, homes packed tightly together, walls thin, foundations worn by time and strain. This was not a place built to withstand force. It was a place built to endure quietly. Families lived close, rooms shared, lives overlapping. Everything held together just enough to get by. They never stood a chance. When the wave came, it didn't come slow and it didn't hesitate. It tore through the narrow streets with a sudden, unstoppable force. Walls gave way almost immediately. Wood splintered. Brick cracked and collapsed. Buildings that had stood for years were gone in seconds. Inside, there was no time to react, no time to understand, only the sound, and then the destruction. People inside were buried, trapped, or swept away. 8 people died, not in a storm, not in a fire, but in beer. And then something even stranger. Crowds gathered, not in fear, but with buckets. They scooped the beer off the street as if people hadn't just died. They took it from the wreckage, from the ground itself. Some drank until they were sick. Others drank until they couldn't stand. In a neighborhood where clean water was scarce, this wasn't just a disaster. To some, it looked like opportunity. You might expect outrage, punishment, and accountability, something to answer for what had just happened. But the ruling was ruled as an act of God. No one was held responsible, no charges, no consequences. And just like that, it was written off as something beyond control. The brewery itself was allowed to reclaim the lost beer as a financial loss. Barrels shattered, streets flooded, lives lost, reduced just to paperwork. In the city, it carried on. The streets were cleaned, the damage repaired. The story slowly faded. It's easy to laugh at a story like this. A flood of beer? It almost sounds impossible, even absurd. But behind it were real people, real lives, families who never expected that day to end the way it did. Homes were destroyed, neighbors were lost, and in the aftermath, there was no one to hold accountable, only accepting what had already been done. And maybe that's what makes the story linger. Not just what happened, but how easily it was dismissed. A reminder that sometimes the ordinary places, the streets we walk without a second thought, hold stories so unbelievable they feel like fiction. If you enjoyed this episode of History's Hidden Corners, please subscribe so you don't miss any more episodes. And because there are more stories just like this one, waiting where you least expect them. So I'll be taking a few weeks off to write the next set of episodes. I'll be back in 4 weeks. See you then.